Good evening. Tonight, we're going to be doing some more Mogtome farming. It's going to be a lot of battle on the big bridge. It's kind of chill, nothing particularly intense. Either we're going to join other people's groups and just participate with them, or if we can't find a group at some point, I'll just make my own. The way that this works, as we also did previously, is that you bring at least 7 Blue Mages. You can bring 8. That makes it more consistent, but it makes it more consistent that you get the tactics correct. Bringing a tank in the 8th slot instead makes the actually successful runs more reliable. So if someone's a bit slow to get to the boss to use their final sting, then having a tank to pick up the boss instead of just having Gilgamesh randomly hitting people is safer. However, if you bring 8 Blue Mages, there's a significantly higher chance that all of the Blue Mages, or at least you have all of the spells that you need amongst each other, namely that there's a decent chance that the majority of them will have Ram's voice and will have things like ultra vibration. But if you only bring 7 Blue Mages, there's 1/8 less chance of that happening. Which is why I think most parties prefer to go full Blue Mage. It's also easier because how do you determine who gets to be the tank? You can only have one tank. Is it easier? Is it better? The simple reason why having a tank in the 8th slot is even suggested, offered as an option in some parties, is simply because you only need 7 Blue Mages correctly using Final Sting to kill the boss in the second part. If you have 7 Blue Mages doing that, and you kind of have to do that, then you don't need player 8. There's always going to be a player 8 just standing there. So that is sort of the reason. Let's see here. Oh no, there's 2 groups. Well, one of them will fill first and then the other. Right. So if you're wondering if you feel like my voice sounds different on this particular stream, it is probably because I am having a little bit of a little bit sick. So I'm on all the pain meds that I have, and then we will stream because I promised I would. So I will. Yeah. The plan is basically to do this content tonight. Given that it's a little bit early in the stream, there's probably not many hearing this, if anyone. But if you tune into the stream and you have a question about something Final Fantasy XIV, you're welcome to ask it. Anything. We can even showcase things if we're not in a group spamming runs at the time, or we can approach it later. That is also an option. But yeah, that is the general game plan. I also understand that there's probably a lot of people just hanging out with family these days. Or for any other reason, simply don't have time to hang out with me doing Mogtome farming. But that's fine. It's a little strange that we have 2 nearly full parties and no one else is joining either one. That is a little bit surprising. Now, I can also remind that while I'm starting to be better at advertising it in my actual video descriptions, some people are not aware that there is a Discord community server for the channel. So in the live chat there's a pinned comment. That should still be the case if you're watching the VOD later, I'm sure. This link is supposed to be like a forever link. So if you hear this in the future, the link is still valid if you can see it. It's just a link to join the Discord server. What happens on the Discord server is that there are channels dedicated to the weekly schedule, so you always know what's going on the YouTube channel. There's a channel dedicated to whenever there's a new video. For instance, there is a post right now about this particular stream existing. So if you've ever found it difficult to track what's happening on the channel, then that is a great place to go. Anyway, we could talk a little bit about what the actual strategy is. So if you saw last time I did Mogtome farming, then you will probably have seen plenty of how this goes. But if you haven't, then the general game plan is that the first part of the trial is a very normal, like a DPS race kind of situation, with 8 blue mages, especially blue mages with a full toolkit and knowing what they're doing. You can skip through the first half of the first phase in 10 seconds or less. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, and that is typically done with Moonflute and just throwing all the cooldowns that you have at Gilgamesh. Of course, only the cooldowns that you need. You would prefer to keep some cooldowns in particular for the second phase of the first phase. Gilgamesh goes completely untargetable when he drops to 50% health, but he still takes damage over time. So if you if you put dots on Gilgamesh before he becomes untargetable, then you can get some extra damage in while he's untargetable. It doesn't change much, because when he becomes targetable again, he will fight you for up to 10 seconds, I believe, around 10 seconds, almost completely independent of how much damage you do to him. But he needs to drop, I believe it's below 30% health to run away. And that's what we want, such that we can skip to the next part of the fight. So the game plan is to nuke Gilgamesh as quickly as we can down to 50%, and then we want to make sure that he drops below 30% in less than 10 seconds when he becomes targetable again. Then we get to the ads, which are most reliably dealt with Ram's Voice and Ultra Vibration. You can use level 5 Death instead, but it has a chance to fail. So typically you would rather avoid that if you can. Uh-oh. So one extra thing to be aware of while this happens is that he will always make one blue mage or one player into a frog. and that frog is going to get chased by Enkidu. And Enkidu does a decent amount of damage. And when Gilgamesh becomes targetable again, he will also do some AoE damage right where he's standing. So you don't want to hang out right next to him, that's not safe. And then we want Ram's Voice and Ultra Vibration. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. There's a little bit of a disagreement here, I suppose. It's okay. We will salvage this. So the game plan is Whistle for the 80% damage boost, Moon Flute for the 50% damage boost, Off Guard the boss, someone already did, and then we just final sting into him. Some people like to also add Tingle on top of that, but the thing is that Final Sting does 2000 potency outright. Whistle increases that by 80%, Moonfruit increases that by 50%. Tingle, I believe, adds 100 potency. 100 potency to the initial 2000 potency, so while it is boosted by all the other buffs on the list, it's not nearly as impactful as the other buffs, as it's only 5%, while the others are 80% and 50%. The reason why it somehow makes sense to use Off Guard, but it doesn't make sense to use Tingle, is simply because it only requires one person to use Off Guard, and I believe you can... I believe Off Guard weirdly has a shorter... GCD. And I guess no one were able to heal. Maybe I'll hold back a little bit, so that someone is able to cast a heal. That is not always guaranteed.
I must say, I quite... Hold that thought, I won't go down so easily.
There we go. Another one. So this group seems to be pretty consistent. We just have to figure out who does what. For instance, you can see how you really only need one Blue Mage to cast Ram's Voice. You only need one Blue Mage to cast Ultra Vibration for each of the packs. And that is more consistent than trying to pile them all up for a single cast. We just need to get everyone to agree on this. And then we just have to figure out who does it. And then it's going to already get a little bit faster, just from that. I forgot to not use Moonflute. I just said I wasn't going to.
It's just too much for me.
Hey Sydney, how are you doing?
I lied.
Oops, didn't want to use the J-kick there. Oh well. Oh dear. I think that was 3 Ultra Vibrations. And Sydney says, taking a break from work. Everyone is on Christmas break, so not much work to do. Ah, I see. Well, is it like that classic with the time between Christmas and holidays and end of year where not much is happening. You can't really get started on new projects, but work has to be done. Is that how you mean with like quote unquote work?
I admit it. Fighting all 8 of you is just too much for me. Not? Ha! I lied. Everything. Why, I've been had.
Oh dear. Oop, we survived.
Remembered something.
Ow. And Sydney says everyone is out with family, so no one is giving good priorities on tasks, so just waiting on responses from other teams. Yeah, bureaucracy. Yeah. That does sound like the time between whoops, I didn't mean to do that. The time between the 24th and the end of the year. I hope it's not too boring, or that you can at least find something to entertain yourself with. I guess maybe you did. Yeah, I'm going to be doing this Mogtome stone grinding for a few hours on stream, so it's not too intense. So that's an option. Someone just wrote an interesting tip in the chat in game. Said, if you can, remember to sprint before queuing into the trial. You'll get the sprint buff, and at the same time all of your cooldowns are reset. That makes perfectly good sense. When you enter a dungeon, all of your cooldowns are reset. But apparently sprint isn't removed in that same situation. In like 99% of content you'll queue into, there's going to be at least one person in the party that is not going to be ready. They might be watching the cutscene, maybe they're a little bit longer on the loading screen. Whatever the reason is, the likely situation is that sprint is going to run out before you're allowed to run anywhere. But in this particular trial spam, we should be able to do this. Most people are generally here, so it will you will be able to like click go, and within a couple seconds it'll be good. Get in a couple of seconds, sprint is good, or well, you can start sprinting. So that is pretty effective. I think I'll try to remember to do this from now on.
Your favorite? I admit it.
Sydney says, I'm excited to finally get closer to the end of Shadowbringers with my wife, so hopefully we can not worry about spoilers anymore. Oh yeah. That is very good. Like the longer, the older Endwalker gets, the less likely people are to remember to like hide spoilers or be careful about it. It can also, at some point, it's just not possible to hide every little thing that is discovered. Like for instance in my job comparison videos, the best time, the best content to, you know, showcase level 90 job is in Endwalker content. So the best I can do is try and choose dungeons that don't have nearly as much story relevant like actual content in it. But you can only do so much. However, one thing, Sydney, that you and the wife will probably also run into is, as you start to work on Endwalker, you might start to discover things that before were, you know, no context. You can hardly follow what's going on in that footage anyway. Like seeing a sort of NPC you've never seen before, you know, maybe a race you haven't seen before in footage is completely redundant when you don't even recognize what it is. So it's less spoilery in that effect, while, for example, someone mentioned that, I'm going to be vague, don't worry, someone were in like the later parts of the main quest in Endwalker, and then they decided to watch one of my videos that happened to include briefly footage from a dungeon that happened to mention the character. But because the player, you know, my guess is, because, you know, I don't know all the details, but my guess is that, you know, they were playing, progressing the story the day before. They go to bed, they get up, they go to work, maybe they watch the video while on a break. And that name is still clear in their memory. And then they see the name right there on the screen. The thing is that what that tells them as a spoiler is there exists a dungeon in future that stars this character or features this character, whoever it is. And that's it, really. But sometimes that can feel like a spoiler in its own right. Because if you know that the character exists in the future, then you know they're not, you know, going to be resolved in the immediate, like, present. Like, where you are in the story. Like, if, say, you were in the level 30s, for example, just as a random example, if you were in the 30s and you're working on the story that leads up to Titan, and then you see that in the level 50s, people are still dealing with Titan, what you could, like, glean from that... Oh. What you could glean from that is that Titan isn't dealt with for 20 levels. Like, apparently the story goes, you deal with Ifrit real fast, and then you're just dealing with Titan for the rest of A Realm Reborn's leveling process. Like, with no context, that could be how you would like understand it, what you would see. But that's hard to say. That's why I'm saying that it's complicated what can be considered a spoiler and what isn't considered a spoiler. That's why it's like the best I can do for this particular stream is say this trial is a side quest trial that is entirely optional, and, well, for the most part, the side quest it is related to, the Hildebrand story, is so nonsensical that if you don't know the context, like if you don't know why we're fighting Gilgamesh here, if you don't know that personally from doing the Hildebrand story, then you can't possibly figure out why we're fighting Gilgamesh here, like, from a spoiler. And Sydney says, yeah, that happened with a video recommended saying why something is the best ally. And you had no idea who it was. And then you did the quest that happened to lead to that. You were introduced to it in your first cutscene that evening. Oh. Yeah, that's difficult. And at that point, uh-oh, I'm dead. Okay, I'm not dead. Whew. But yeah, it is difficult. Also because, well, you know how a thumbnail wants to make you want to click it, and one of the best ways to make you want to click it is to put the discussion subject front and center right on the thumbnail, but that is not very spoiler sensitive. You can only do so much, but that is so unfortunate. Yeah, exactly. What I was trying to get at is that a lot of story that you meet, like a lot of content that you might see just in general videos by content creators, YouTube videos, whatever, maybe streams, you can get away with watching as a new player simply because it's so far into the future that by the time you get to it, you can't even remember. So it sort of works out. But when you reach like early Shadowbringers, then there is a very good chance that you are actually going to remember everything you see. That's problematic. I don't know if it's actually worth racing someone like this, because then they're going to be weaker. I really don't know.
I feel we've gained an understanding. An understanding. I will pound you, silly!
It worked out. It also depends, like, how far in the future a particular piece of content is for you. Depends on how quickly you make your way through the story, of course. For example, if you played through the main quest as fast as I'm doing on my weekly streams, then it would take you, I don't know, like 9 months? Not sure, maybe more, to just reach Endwalker. And that's a guess, I'm not sure. And if you see some random spoiler while you're in A Realm Reborn, if you play that amount, then you're probably still half a year away if you're playing that much. And the question is whether you would be able to remember that.
Go on, Enkidu. It's Toad, your favorite. I admit it.
It's close.
Fighting all 8 of you is just too much for me. Not half my life. Empathy.
It's a bit scary to be the tank on that bit. Yeah, for anyone that doesn't watch the live letters, which is totally understandable, the live letters can contain a lot of spoilers just by design, so it makes total sense to maybe not want to watch it if you're still progressing through the story, or you want to experience the story for the first time when you see it, and not on a live letter where the devs are talking about it. But if you haven't seen it, then we did get a little bit of a talk about the paladin changes coming in January. I've not talked much about it on streams, but I have written some things up, for instance, on the Discord server. Just mainly discussing things. But the thing is, the main thing that is very significant is that we were told that Goring Blade and the final blade of the 3 blades combo at the end that you get at level 90, I believe they specifically said that they no longer have a damage over time component, which is, for the blade effect, it's completely pointless or not relevant, because you're going to use it anyway. You're going to use it just the same, assuming that it does the most damage, which it probably does, so it changes nothing. But for Goring Blade, the reason why you use Goring Blade the way that you do as a paladin right now is that the dot combined with the attack damage itself turns out to be worth more than what Royal Authority is worth. This of course means both Royal Authority and the Atonement attacks. Now, if Goring Blade does no damage over time anymore, then either Goring Blade does more damage than Royal Authority and Atonements outright, which means that you have no reason to use Royal Authority, which does not make sense, or Goring Blade does not do more damage than Royal Authority and the Atonements, which means there's no point in using Goring Blade, which also does not make any sense. We were also told that the act of finishing a weapon skill combo, and it was vaguely described like that, I'm not making that part up, a weapon skill combo that is finished will give you a stack, or at least give you a buff that allows you to cast Holy Spirit with more potency and with no cast time, whether it's free also, I'm not sure. If any weapon skill combo being finished counts, then we're back to square one. Goring Blade or Royal Authority is superior. If on the other hand, Goring Blade, the weapon skill combo Goring Blade specifically is the one that gives you the Holy Spirit cast, and then the Royal Authority combo gives you Atonement stacks, then maybe there is a reason to use both. Maybe Goring Blade and the Royal Authority are equally good, so the new game plan is to like stockpile buffs so that you can get 3 Atonements and maybe you can stack them, maybe you can have multiple Holy Spirits that are augmented and boosted, so you can drag them into like a burst combo of some sort. We don't know. I'm mostly bringing this up because I think a lot of people knew that we were getting information on some stuff about Paladin's changes in that live letter, but the information that we got amounts to something to the effect of something is changed that is significant enough that we know for a fact that the job is not going to be the same. Simply put, removing the dot from Goring Blade means that we don't know what Goring Blade is supposed to be used for now. That is that's my perspective, at least. You might if you have other thoughts, like maybe you guys have your own ideas of how you think Paladin will change, I would love to hear them. Just presenting something we can talk about.
I must say, I quite enjoy these tussles. I feel we've gained an understanding.
But what I'm trying to get at is that removing the dot from Final Sting makes it well, removing the dot from Goring Blade makes it do nothing in particular. Let's say, hey Doso, how are you doing? You say easy solution for them is to give Goring Blade a 30 to 60 second damage buff mechanic similar to Warrior Storm's Eye. Yeah, that's true. I have heard people suggest that they're probably going to make Goring Blade just give, I don't know, fight or flight. In a similar way to Storm's Eye. I don't know if that's like good or bad. That certainly feels a little boring, given that, well, Warrior already does that, and Dark Knight kind of already does that. But it does seem like the obvious path, doesn't it? I certainly can see that, so.
Go on, you. It's Toad, your favorite. Fine, I admit it. Fighting all 8 of you is just too much for me.
But it is the easy solution. I think the worst, the scariest stories people have come up with is that the easiest, absolutely easiest solution is to just make over all of the tanks to become different flavors of Warrior, which is certainly not something I would like. There's also homogenization of jobs is definitely more apparent since Shadowbringers. Yeah, I think that is made extremely apparent by a combination of both jobs being made similar, but also by the way that certain actions that were sort of similar, but worked differently because of different cooldowns, or the way that they worked in rotations and stuff because of their cooldowns. Then with Endwalker, a lot of cooldowns, particularly raid cooldowns, were all normalized to be a 2-minute cooldown. Which then made all these sort of slightly different cooldowns all become the same one. Like how many flavors of whoops, that was a mistake, but I got toted anyway. How many flavors of 2-minute raid cooldown that increases your damage done for 15 seconds do we have? Let's see. Monk has one. Reaper has one. That's 20 seconds, but it's close enough, I'd say. Dragoon's Battle Litany is close. Dancer and Bard has each their own variant of it. Red Mage has one, Summoner has one. That one is 30-second duration though, but you can see how there's a lot of jobs now that has a every 2 minutes you do more damage for a little bit, whereas before, and it doesn't sound like much at the end of the day, it doesn't sound like that much, but in Shadowbringers a lot of these cooldowns were distinctly different simply because of their cooldown on like alone. Like for example, Devotion, which was the Searing Light that Summoner has now. I believe that was on a 3-minute cooldown in Shadowbringers. I think, was Brotherhood on a 90-second cooldown? Or was it also 3 minutes? Or was it 2 minutes all along? Things like that, where they standardize it to 2 minutes. The good side of it is that it makes it easier for cooldowns to line up together. The bad side of it is that it makes it not very impressive to do that. Like, making it so that all the raid cooldowns line up together was difficult. It used to be a thing only the best of the best could even do. These days, because it isn't that difficult, it has gone from being it's something you can do, to becoming something that you probably should do, to becoming something that is almost a problem if you don't in hard content. Specifically in hard content, like in Extremes, Savages, Ultimates. Even like if you're trying to master easy content, like you're trying to master your job on easier content, then being aware of these timers are some of the most impactful things you can do as a player to increase your performance. If you can delay a cooldown without losing anything, such that you can place it in a burst that is for some reason delayed because of someone in your party being slow to use their cooldown, then you're doing better than if you didn't do that. And because of all these cooldowns being so homogenized, the best you can do is do the perfect rotation and then hope everyone else does so too. Anyway, I'll be right back, and then we'll either find a new group or make our own, and then we continue. Alright, I'm back. But yes, as I was saying, is that even in Shadowbringers, it's probably likely that a lot of jobs looked very similar in one way or another. But the simple fact that a lot of them had, you know, different cooldowns, it sort of made it feel more distinctly different. That's my perspective, at least. I remember in Shadowbringers, the way that I viewed Warrior and Dark Knight is that they were very similar. They had similar toolkits with Delirium and Inner Release. In the same fashion, Gunbreaker and Paladin sort of had similar toolkits with No Mercy and Fight or Flight. Now, you might say that that's oversimplifying it, considering that No Mercy works differently into a similar rotation. And Paladin has 2 separate bursts, right? But it's still kind of close. Like, I'm just saying that the reason why Gunbreaker feels more distinctly different from Paladin is probably more by the way that you do your burst rather than the way that it exists. Paladin's burst is, well, its fight or flight cooldown takes a little bit longer. It's a little longer. It actually boosts your damage by more, but the Paladin is instead hampered by the fact that it is far less capable of capitalizing on it. It does less damage over time. Well, it does less damage in the same time frame. And simply because it does less damage in the same time frame as the Gunbreaker, or it has less ability to like concentrate it, the fact that Fight or Flight is better in every way than No Mercy is balanced. We could probably also argue that if Gunbreaker had a 25-second No Mercy window rather than a 20-second, would it change much for Gunbreaker? It might. It might change some things for Gunbreaker. But I think that if Paladin had a 20-second Fight or Flight window, it would be significantly worse off than Gunbreaker would be better off by having a longer No Mercy window, because one thing you may have seen if you have looked into trying to optimize Gunbreaker is that generally speaking, people wanted to have a full 1-2-3 combo in their No Mercy windows by having a certain GCD. This was typically viable, very possible. The best gear sets you could have typically would provide the skill speed needed to do this automatically. You would reach anywhere between 237 and 245 by just putting on the gear with crit on it. So it was never really up for debate. You didn't need to consider the option that you could use less skill speed. And I believe in this raid tier, in this current raid tier, the best Gunbreaker outfit, like the best in slot sets for Savage Pandemonium, is at 250, so 0 skill speed. And then we discover that Gunbreaker is capable of functioning with that. We have then discovered places where it can be problematic, but not impossible. Losing 1 GCD in your No Mercy window, which is what you're losing, means that you will not have a 1-2-3 combo anywhere in your No Mercy. Usually you will put something else there. Either you will put 2 steps of your basic combo, or you will put extra burst strikes when possible. I think the more interesting thing that people started observing is that it might genuinely be a problem, a genuine thing, that you might run into No Mercy windows on occasion that you just weren't capable of having a full powder gauge for. And then you suddenly had to work with that. What does that change? Well, if you have one less burst strike to perform at the end of your combos, if you had any, then that makes space for more 1-2-3 combos. Anyway, that's a huge sidetrack from talking about homogenization of jobs and then talking about Paladin and so on. But hey, it's something to talk about.
Fighting all in is just too much for me.
And here you can see we have the party variant where we have a tank.
Just remembered something. I must say, I quite enjoy it.
Oh, I forgot to use Moon Flute.
I will pound you, silly! Aha! I won't go down so easy.
As you could see there, suddenly with only 7 Blue Mages, we need every single final sting to make it work. $67 Mogtomes.
Go on, you! It's two! Your favorite! Fine, I admit it.
I need quite a lot, so I'll probably not finish tonight.
It's just too much for
But that's fine.
Not. Ha! I lied! Heresy! Why, I've been hurt! This is far from the strongest of tears. I feel so betrayed. Goodness gracious!
Nope, that was not necessary. So we've ran into an interesting discovery in relation to using sprint leading up to pulling to entering the dungeon. Is that so someone in game earlier mentioned that if you use sprint before you click enter, then when you zone in, you will have whatever much of sprint left that you had, but all your cooldowns will reset, which means that you would be able to cast sprint an extra time. Possibly. But if you exit the trial with sprint on cooldown, there's a genuine possibility that you will not have sprint available to cast preemptively. Skullwolf says, hey Skullwolf, how are you doing? He said, I completely forgot to check your schedule for this week. I forgot your streams today. Hey Skullwolf. That's okay. The schedule is mostly there to help those that are interested find the streams when they're there. Welcome Skullwolf to how you farm Moogle treasure tome stones with Blue Mages. It's completely ridiculous, but you know how it goes when it's Blue Mages. Well, Skullwolf, if you... Oh, there was a little bit of a lag spike. See here, everyone uses buffs that makes the final sting do way more damage. And then we just throw everyone at it. And kill the boss just like that. And then we leave. Now the reason for that is, as I mentioned earlier, is that final sting does 2000 potency. You add off guard, that's 5%. And then you add whistle, that's 80%, and you add moonfruit, that's 50%, and all these things stack multiplicatively, meaning that final sting presumably hits for, you know, many thousands of potency. Let's see, 80%. That means that it would do 3,600, and then 50% of that. That's 5,400, and then 5% of that. It's like 5,650 potency or something like that. And if you just throw enough of those at the boss, then he dies. It has been optimized to the point that people have figured out that you only need 7 Blue Mages to do it. Which is why we only have 7 Blue Mages and not 8. Yeah, Sydney says, I spent Poetics on 50, 60, 70 gear. I spent Poetics on 50, 60, 70 gear for all rolls. After Shadowbringers, does the roll gear from Blacksmith replace that gear? Uh-oh. It looks like the last Blue Mage messed up their final sting somehow. Just use your final sting. So let's see. After Shadowbringers, does the roll gear from Blacksmith replace that gear? We're just about to wipe. Why is the boss at 0.1% health? So now we leave because if you use Final Sting, you can't use it again for 10 minutes. But that debuff is removed when you exit content. So if we fail to get it right, we just go out and go again. Sydney asked about what you do with roll gear. So in Shadowbringers, you can still buy gear with Poetics in the exact same way you have always been able to. That is completely unchanged. You just have to get a little further in the story, I believe. If you say you're on your way to finish Shadowbringers, you should be far enough. In Endwalker, so the way gearing works in Endwalker is exactly the same as it works in Shadowbringers, for example, until you hit level 90. Exactly at level 90 is where things change significantly. Mainly because the final gear isn't in the game yet. I think to answer your question properly, Sydney, can you add a little bit more to what you mean? The blacksmith, the roll gear from the blacksmith. Do you mean just the gear that you get from the blacksmith in Shadowbringers? I'm not sure how far in the story you are. That's why I'm not sure. Okay, maybe I understand now. Just have to think a little bit more. So, the blacksmith and the roll gear sets from the blacksmith in Shadowbringers is entry expansion gear. So, at the start of Shadowbringers, that was what you used to enter, you know, level 80 content. Sydney says, I haven't seen where the salesperson for Poetics is in Shadowbringers. Okay. In that case, don't worry. I can tell you where it is. I can tell you where it is if you would like, but it would probably feel like a spoiler. But yeah, you have to... I believe you always have to complete the like leveling story of an expansion to be able to buy for Poetics.
I won't go down so easily.
So, if you haven't reached the point where you can... Like, if you haven't reached the point where you can buy with Poetics, then you won't need it. Like, you will get there. Hello, Chris. How are you doing? Hi from Italy. Nice.
Not. Ha! I lied. Everything.
But yeah, you will have to start with with just using the blacksmith gear. You saw my video for beginners. You mean the like which job to start with, or did you mean a specific job starter guide? Yes, Sydney. I would say start with the roll gear from the blacksmith. When you can buy the gear for Poetics, you can just get that. You don't need to get it any faster than that. I think the main difference why it feels much stranger is because I don't know if you're handed gear in Shadowbringers in the same way that you're handed gear in the previous expansions. Like throughout the post-game stories.
Go on, Enkidu. It's true. Your favorite. I admit it. Fighting all 8 of you is just too much for me. Not. Ha! I lied. Everything. I've been had. This is far from the strongest of fears. I feel so betrayed. Goodness gracious. I just remembered something.
Chris says I play more MMORPGs. Now I need one low-level class where I don't want to push more buttons. If you like jobs with less buttons that are less intense, then for tanks I would recommend Warrior. For DPS, I would recommend Summoner. If you're a new player, you will not have access to it, but at higher level I would also recommend Reaper. They get Reapers get a bunch of buttons, but the rotation is relatively approachable, so it doesn't go super fast. Yeah, exactly, Arcanist. I would recommend Arcanist and Summoner if you don't like to have too many buttons. They have, like, the majority of their stuff is in less than 20 buttons, which sounds like a lot, maybe. But there are jobs that have nearly 36 buttons. So then suddenly it isn't as bad. Sydney says, I don't think the quests reward gear anymore. Oh, okay. And Chris says, but this Arcanist is it's a class in need. So I'm guessing what you're asking is it a job that has a place in endgame content? If that's what you're worried about, at level 30, you will advance Arcanist to become either a summoner or a scholar, or both. Arcanist uniquely has a mechanic where its level is shared between these two jobs, so you have both access to a healer and a DPS if you want to. All jobs, no exception. Well, there is one exception, but it's pretty obviously blatant. But all normal combat jobs are viable at max level. In fact, when I was doing Savage raiding on stream at the start of this current raid tier that is still active now, I had problems joining random parties as a summoner because there were so many summoners that there weren't any parties that were, you know, needing an extra summoner. So you should not see that as a problem when you're leveling. But that is to say that summoner is absolutely a decent job for raiding. But Final Fantasy XIV's balancing in the game is close enough that all jobs are viable in all content. And if you're wondering about the blatantly obvious exception, Blue Mage, which is the job I'm playing right now, which you might be saying all this looks ridiculous. Blue Mage is what is called a limited job, which means that it cannot access content on the same playing field as normal jobs. Its max level is only 70, whereas normal jobs have a max level of 90. But Blue Mage is exceptionally good at certain things, like trouncing old content like this, which looks ridiculous in practice. But you cannot really main Blue Mage in the same way you would be able to main a normal job. But yeah, Summoner and Scholar are both great jobs. In endgame content, there are advantages to all jobs. For example, I would say that one of the big advantages of Summoner is that it is extremely mobile, making it very easy for you to adapt to a new boss fight you haven't seen before. And you have access to shields for yourself. You have access to a res, so you can raise other players. So you can do a lot of utility. See, Chris says, I like Bard for buffing the party, but I see it has medium difficulty. Yes, so if you like a specific job, now you said you watched my beginner guide, and that's why I say it's medium difficulty. If you like a particular job and you think that it looks good, Like, it looks like something you want to play. I would recommend, if you're still on the fence, maybe watch a guide on it, see if you can like get an idea of how it looks to play at higher level, if you're still interested. Otherwise, you can play any job you'd like. Choose the one that you think looks most inspiring for you. Just keep in mind that Bard isn't like pure support, so to speak. It is not. It has more raid buffs than, say, an Arcanist Summoner, and it has some very unique utility tools. But that also means that it makes it more difficult to use those utility tools optimally. And I believe Bard has a lot of buttons, if I remember correctly. It has nearly 3 full action bars of stuff. And it plays very quickly compared to something... Well, Arcanist plays quickly at times, but... the jobs that I put in the low, like easier categories were primarily because they don't play like super duper fast. They're not too complicated. One thing that if you choose to play Bard, one thing you will ultimately become extremely well acquainted with as you level up past 50 is the 2-minute burst window. Ultimately, you would eventually be introduced to this regardless of what job you play, because of how prominently it is featured in the game. What this is that most jobs with a raid buffing cooldown, this buff will have a 2-minute cooldown on. Which means that every 2 minutes, everyone in your party that has a raid buff will use said raid buff. Which maximizes the potential damage of your raid. And because Bard has 2 buffs, I believe, Battle Voice, Radiant Finale at max level, that are raid-wide. And then they also have multiple buffs applied to themselves that are also on 2 minutes. Barrage, Raging Strikes, Wondrous Minuet, just to mention a few. It means that as a Bard, whether you can manage this 2-minute burst window is going to matter a lot more for your damage potential than some other jobs might. Again, this is ultimately only crucially important if you want to play optimally at max level. But for the majority of the content in the game, this is not mandatory. You will learn it with time. There's also the part that Summoner does not have dots to apply, damage over time effects. Bard has 2. So, there's a bunch of reasons. I do believe I touch on all these aspects for why Bard is medium and not easy in comparison to Summoner. But Chris, if you feel like Bard is what really sounds like the right job for you, I would say play Bard. It's not like you can't change. If you find out by level 30 that you actually don't like Bard, you can just switch to a different job and continue on the same character. You will just have to, catch up the character. Chris says, I ask because in Blade and Soul, for high damage, you need to press more buttons. Okay, so, I never played Blade and Soul, so that's difficult for me to relate to, but I can say that the fastest playing jobs are not necessarily the best jobs in the game. But one thing you have to keep in mind, Chris, is that the best and the worst jobs are close enough in strength to each other that it is a non-issue. What I mean by that is that what you need to do, Chris, is figure out what role would you like to play. Do you want to be a tank, a healer, or a DPS? Well, ultimately, that's what you need to figure out. Then you need to figure out what job in that role you want to play. You don't have to worry about whether that job you choose to play is viable, because they're all viable. So you just have to figure out what you want. If you want something easy, play something easy. If you want something complex, play that. If you want something with a specific aesthetic, play that. If you think Bard speaks to you, then play Bard. If you feel something else looks interesting, play that. You could also just try stuff. You don't have, like, your first job doesn't have to be the one you end up playing. That is not a requirement. It's not too difficult to, like, catch up levels again if you switch. So I would definitely recommend, if you're not sure what you want to play, shop around a bit. Try different jobs. I would say that it might take until level... It might take quite a few levels to figure out what you want to play, so I would recommend that... See what you think looks interesting. Uh-oh. See what you think is interesting. And then try that. This can be for any reason. It can be you think it looks cool. It can be that you like how it seems to play. There's a lot of things you can look for. Chris says, how do I change class? So your character unlocks a class by going to the class, like master you could say, and starting the quest on it. Then they will eventually hand you a weapon that matches that class. And ultimately, what job you are is what weapon you're wearing. For instance, here you can see this is a Blue Mage's arm, which is the reason why I'm a Blue Mage. There's the extra detail that once you unlock jobs at level 30, you will get a soul crystal, which you need to equip to upgrade your class to the job. This is just something you have to remember to do when you equip a class's weapon if you don't use like a set. Uh-oh. So, let's say you choose to start as Bard. What's going to happen is that your character is going to come into existence with a bow. You will just have a bow, and you will have unlocked the Bard, the Archer class, I suppose. If you then play and find out that your friend who's playing Dragoon seems to have the way cooler job, and that's okay, you can in fact totally be two of the same job in most content as you play through the story. That is not an issue. Then you can just go to the Lancer trainer, or the Lancers Guild, start the quest. Generally, quests that unlock stuff in the game have like a blue color on them, like on the background of the exclamation mark, and a plus to indicate that you're getting something new. So you need to look for that. You can also just, look up where to start on Lancer. And then you will start that quest. Very quickly, the trainer will hand you a lance. And then you're ready to go. And then you start from level 1 with that job. And you don't lose any of your archer progress. You can have all of the jobs maxed out at once if that's what you want. I believe the requirement to unlock the ability to switch between like to unlock a new job, I believe the requirement is that you need to have a job at level, well, a class at level 10. So you have to, like, if you choose Archer, then you have to level that Archer to level 10 at the very least. That you can do that in a very, very short time. That's a non-issue. If you want to have access to all of the starter classes, you may need to level to about 15, because which class you start at, or which class you start as, determines where you start in the game. And there are 3 starting cities. Because there are 3 starting cities, that of course means that a third of the starting classes are in each of those cities. So if, say, you start as an archer, and then you figure out quite quickly that it's absolutely not what you wanted, it's not what you expected, and now you think, now I'd rather have been an Arcanist after all. Arcanist is in a different starting city. So, for that reason, you would have to play at least until you reach that city. You unlock all 3 starting cities around level 15 in the story. So you would only be forced to deal with whatever class you started with until level 15. Then you can choose among all of the classes that I covered in my beginner guide. And if you need some guidance on any of these jobs, I do have guides on all of the jobs. Some of them might be a little bit more dated than others, but ultimately most of my guides are like still relevant or can somehow be applied. There might be patch notes in a comment, like a comment on the video explaining what's different, but you can also just ask, like, if you start playing one of the starting classes and you find out that you don't quite understand something, if you see I'm streaming, you're welcome to ask a question on stream about the class. You can also leave a comment on a relevant video, like for instance, if you start as Archer, you can just go to my Archer starter guide and ask if there's something you're not sure about with the class.
Your favorite? Fine, I admit it.
And that was a really long explanation of how to get started, I suppose. But yeah, unlike other MMOs, some other MMOs, in Final Fantasy XIV, you don't have to worry about choosing the correct job at the start, because all jobs are viable. You just have to choose one that you like. Granted, there are a few that might have very minor issues with elitists if you're playing like endgame content, savage content. But if you're starting on the game from the very beginning, then you are a long way from having to worry about this. Like a long, long way from having to worry about it. So I would say just choose a job you like. If you enjoy it, great. If you don't, try something else. Eventually you'll hopefully find something that you like.
Go on, you. It's Toad, your favorite? Fine, I admit it. Fighting all 8 of you. It's just too much for me.
So when you change class, Chris, you will of course need gear that matches the role at the very least. So for instance, mages of different kinds tend to be able to share equipment. Healers tend to be able to share equipment. Tanks tend to share equipment. But for the most part, this will be a minor issue as you progress. There is a gear set menu that you can use. And this will also allow you to automatically add the soul crystal when you switch. I think it, like Chris, I think if you've played other MMOs before, I'm not sure on Blade and Soul. I've never played Blade and Soul, so I wouldn't be able to say for certain. But if you've played another MMO, you're sort of acquainted with this sort of stuff, then I'm pretty confident that you would be able to figure out how to make gear sets and how to switch between classes. It's not something that the game is trying to hide from you. And the important thing here is that the game will not take anything away from you without your knowledge. If you switch class, you will not lose anything. You will just switch to that class. You will not lose any levels. You can be max level in all jobs. The main concern you might have if you unlock a lot of classes at once is that while your inventory space for equipment is extremely large, it's not infinite. So if you stockpile too much equipment, you will eventually be forced to sort through it. And that can take time if you delay it long enough. Like I have a series of streams where I'm replaying the game from the beginning. There should be a playlist somewhere on my channel for it, and it's called MSQ Rewind Replay. It's typically pretty spoiler safe. We don't really talk about something happening in the future in enough detail for it to be a problem, or for it to really be a spoiler. But in that series, I of course will run into many of these kinds of situations that a new player might, and I will of course know exactly what the answer to each issue is. For example, I have a video in that series where we unlock Black Mage, well, Thaumaturge, but normally we play Dragoon, so we had to figure out how to make a gear set for Thaumaturge, how to switch to Thaumaturge. It's so simple that it's something that is a minor inconvenience in the entire stream, something that I hardly address, because it happens so naturally. So these kinds of things are something that I think once you start playing, Chris, I'm sure that you will find that, oh, that's not that hard, and you will just get to it. And if you don't, you can always ask. On a different note, I don't know if Sydney is still here. I don't know if I properly managed to cover your questions on the Shadowbringers gearing situation. We did talk about it, but I don't know if you got the answers that you wanted. If you're still here, then just let me know if you're still uncertain. I know that I might have not been super clear in the explanations that I gave.
must say, I quite enjoy this. And I won't go down so easily.
Oh, we are over 100.
Go on, you. It's true. You're pretty fine. I admit it. Fighting all 8 of you.
You're very welcome,
Just
Chris.
so much for me.
It's not trivial to find all this information. So I'm glad to hear that you're like seeking out and asking if when you have any concerns, rather than just not knowing where to go.
Just remembered something.
You're always welcome to ask questions.
I must say, I quite enjoy this time. I will.
I can also say that for anyone watching that isn't too deep into Final Fantasy XIV yet and are looking at this and thinking, is this what endgame looks like? It does not. This is Blue Mage being weird. Blue Mage is a limited job, which both means that you have only, your max level is only 70 instead of 90. And they have access to a lot of really weird spells. For example, spells that cause you to die, but as a compensation, they do an extremely large amount of damage. Which is what we're using here. What's happening is that there is a special event happening right now, called the Moogle Treasure Trove. And incidentally, right now, people have discovered that doing this particular trial repeatedly, which is a boss encounter, with 7 Blue Mages at the very least, doing exactly what we're doing, is the most effective way to do it. So we just keep doing it. Over and over and over and over and over again. And Chris says this game is optimized good for PlayStation 5? I don't know. I have no clue. I play the game on a computer. PC, specifically on Windows 10, and there it works well. See, Clumsy Ocelot says that it is. Okay, and welcome to the stream, Clumsy Ocelot. I hope you're doing well. I would also imagine that the game plays well on PlayStation 5. The game has been optimized for a while for specifically being able to be played nicely on PlayStation 4, I would assume. So as long as PlayStation 4 can play it, we can probably assume that it also plays well on PlayStation 5. But it's better to have the opinion from someone that plays it on a PlayStation 5 to add. Oh. You're the tank in the party. Oh, that's really funny. Well, in that case, welcome to this to the stream that you are yourself a part of. There's actually you needed background rant. It was actually pretty smart to switch to Paladin for moving the damage from Enkidu. Now that you're here anyway, just wanted to mention that was pretty smart.
Go on, Enkidu. It's two. Your favorite. Fine. I admit it. Fighting all eight of you is just too much for me. No. I lied. Empathy.
But yeah, I don't know how long you've been in on the stream, Clumsy Ocelot or Leonis. But we've just been talking about sort of what people have been asking about, or just talking about nothing in particular. Earlier we were actually speaking of Paladin, we were talking a little bit about the changes. And he says, any chance to use cover before Paladin gets its change? Yeah, exactly, that was just what I was about to... Wait a minute. Uh-oh. Someone's in trouble. Earlier we were talking a little bit about the changes coming to the job. Uh-oh. A lot of people are had their moon flutes run out. Hopefully this still works out.
I won't come down so easily.
Yeah, I was specifically talking about the fact that we have been made aware that Paladin will lose its dots. Their words straight up said that they were losing the dots, like they were removing them. And what that might mean because of specifically Goring Blade. Boring Blade, indeed. My thought process there was that maybe, because the way they said it was that finishing a weapon skill combo will give you access to an augmented Holy Spirit cast with no cast time. They didn't say specifically the Goring Blade combo did that. They said a weapon skill combo did that. So whether it's exclusive to the Goring Blade combo, that's probably not. So if it isn't, then what does Goring Blade do that Royal Authority doesn't do? And I believe Durzo, Durzo mentioned earlier that they said that the worst scenario is probably that the easiest solution to that is that Goring Blade gives a buff similar to Storm's Eye from the warrior. You just call it fight or flight. And then it's similar.
I must say, I quite
Okay, Sydney. Just wanted to be sure. I will admit that maybe I was not being super clear with the answer to your question, so I just wanted to make sure. Just to summarize, Sydney asked about how gearing works for Shadowbringers, because they couldn't see the Poetics gear vendor for Shadowbringers yet. And the general strategy in Shadowbringers is still use the role gear, the job gear set that you get, and then when you can buy gear for Poetics, you buy that. Similar to previous expansions. But if you can't see it, then it's difficult. And I hope you can help the new engineers with their concerns.
Fighting all 8 of you is just too much for me. Not half my line. Everything.
Nope.
While I've been hurt, this is far from the strongest of spears. I feel so betrayed. Goodness gracious.
Goodness gracious.
Just remembered something.
I wonder if I'll be able to get all the tomes that I need tonight. I need like 38 more runs to finish the things that I need.
I won't go down so easily.
If we keep up this pace, it should be doable. It'll take an hour. If no one leaves.
Go on, you. It's too fine. I admit it. Fighting all 8 of you is just too much for me. Not half my line. Everything.
That is such a great solution. People don't want to run around in circles when they're the toad. You just put cover on them, and then it's completely problem solved. No need to worry about whether your White Wind hits them or anything, because they're standing right here.
I must say, oh, that understand. I won't go down so easily.
I hope that Paladin turns out to be better for the changes. It would be a shame if everyone turns out to not like it. But as I've said previously, is that the way I see it is the players that main Paladin are the players that are most important, that they like the rework of the job. Everyone else, they're not like on the front seat for the changes. It has to be the people that already liked Paladin that continue to like it, so that they don't get it taken away from them. And Chris says, is White Mage the best healer? There isn't really a best healer, but if you want to start healing, I would highly recommend trying White Mage first. It is the easiest one to like start on. Personally, I have a very strong preference for Sage myself. I play Sage a lot for healing, which makes me believe that Sage is very easy. But I know some people will disagree on that. And Sage also starts at level 70, so that might be difficult. So if Chris, if you want to try a healer, or if you want to play healer, I would highly recommend trying White Mage first. so that you like learn the basics of how the role plays. And you might say, oh well, I have played healer in a different MMO. The thing is that in Final Fantasy XIV, especially as you get to higher levels, healers work a little bit differently. You mainly heal with your abilities, which means that you're mainly casting attacks while fighting, if you can. And that might feel different to most other MMOs where it's pretty common that you're spamming heals from start to finish. That might be the case for the first few levels. But generally you want to attack as much as you can as a healer in Final Fantasy XIV. Best buffer is the bard. I would say that the best support job, if that's what you're suggesting, is dancer. But the way that the jobs support are significantly different. Bard has an extra raid wide buff, while dancer has the best single person buffs in the game. Like it chooses one person to be its dance partner, and that person benefits significantly more from the buffs that the dancer can give. So what I mean to say is that what the best buffer is depends on what you think you would prefer in a buffer. Astrologian is a healer that is also, you could argue, is a buffer. So it's not exclusive to a specific role either. And Ocelot says Paladin will just be like Warrior. Fight or Flight will just be pure damage most likely, and it will probably have some auto direct crit called Holy Cleave or something. Oh.
I must say, hold that thought. I won't go down so easily.
Sydney predicts a move called Smite. And yes, Chris, Astrologian is the one with the cards. A move called Smite. Yeah, that could work. I had actually little funny stories before the live letter. I had some thoughts myself, namely in relation to how they could make Paladin very similar to Dark Knight. Like, one way to solve the problem that Clemency can't really be cast because it's a spell, so it takes, away from your GCD actions to heal, would be to make Clemency an OGCD. But then they might as well make Holy Spirit an OGCD. And Holy Circle, and then basically you have the Edge of Darkness and Flood of Darkness kind of situation with Dark Knight. Just a little bit more flexible, because you would then also be able to spend your MP on healing if you wanted to, and also if Paladin could OGCD cast heals with Clemency, I think that might be, like, even if they nerfed how much healing it did, it would probably be completely busted. I can't remember if it was early Shadowbringers or early Endwalker. I think it was early Shadowbringers, where healers were so overtuned in their potential damage that it turned out to be a more viable strategy for a tank, namely a Paladin tank, to heal itself with Clemency than to have a healer stop attacking for any reason whatsoever. Meaning that if you had a White Mage, it was better for the White Mage to continue to cast Glare than for them to have to use an OGCD. Because since, at least in Shadowbringers, White Mage's spells, namely their attack spells as well, had, you know, the full 2.5 second cast time, so White Mages could not weave anything in between their attacks. It was better for the Paladin to just heal themselves than cause any inconvenience for the White Mage. I think it was like, it became a thing because it was such a niche damage increase that it turned out to be viable. Like, if you hit a point where it is suddenly viable for a tank to heal itself and a healer to DPS, that is weird enough that it would catch everyone's attention. Whether it was 0.1% better or 10% better is a detail. And Ocelot says, Divine Veil will change for sure. Yes, I agree. I think while they didn't name drop Divine Veil, I believe they said that they were making utility actions easier to use, but didn't specify that can mean Divine Veil. It probably does. It could mean Clemency. It might. It could mean Passage of Arms. It probably doesn't, but it could. And Sydney says, my Paladin is only level 81. I keep hearing about a spell phase, but is it literally just casting the immediate spell ability? And then the sword cast? The spell phase is to cast Requiescent at some point. You have like 30 seconds to spend the stacks, and then you cast Holy Spirit 4 times in a row, and then you cast Confiteor. Can't remember if it's called Confiteor or Confiteor, but the big explosion. And that attack then turns into the 3 swords combo completely automatically. And then you just use those. And that sword combo, as it is right now, doubles as both a magic combo, but simultaneously it applies the Goring Blade effect. So that means that you finish the magic combo by then doing a Royal Authority combo and doing atonements and stuff. Yeah, so
I won't go down, Sprocket. Punch!
let me just make sure that people are aware that we're doing Final Sting. Yeah, so you want to use those 4 Holy Spirits. Because they do enough damage that it is valuable. And Chris says this game is cross-platform. Yes, it is. it's all PC players and PlayStation players are playing on the same servers. The only way I have heard people sometimes are able to recognize a PlayStation player is that it is more likely that a PlayStation player is not going to say much because some PlayStation players don't have a keyboard.
Not? Ha! I lied! Everything! What? I've been had! Ah, years. I feel so betrayed. Goodness gracious. I, just remembered something.
Uh-oh. We have a problem in the back. A huge problem in the back. Thank you, Ocelot. They sort of just ran away while I was casting Ram's voice.
I quite enjoy these tussles. I feel we've gained an understanding. An understanding that I will pound you. I won't go down so easily.
And also it says the wording on paladin stuff needs to change. Passage of arms equals you will only take. Yeah, that is one of the like that is actually a funny one. Scholar does this and paladin does this. Instead of saying reduces damage by X%, it says take X% of damage. I believe the only actions I've seen that says this explicitly is Passage of Arms and Sacred Soil, where that one says you only take 90% damage. Now, the reason why it is really, really silly is because it just causes confusion with no benefit. Taking only 90% of the damage incoming is the same as reducing all damage taken by 10%. So it's just confusing and sounding different without being so. See here. How is it you get Moon Flute again? You get it from Masked Carnival. If they have done 10 things in Masked Carnival, then they can just go and grab it. I believe you have to actively go and grab it. I believe you have to go and grab it, even though it's like an achievement to get access to it. And Ocelot says, Paladin has always been in need of some type of rework. It's got a boring leveling process and it has so many openers for specific fights, while this damage is just subpar compared to Dark Knight. Yeah. One thing that's actually a thing that I've talked about before is that Paladin has needed a rework because Paladin sort of. Now I started playing the game in Stormblood, just for the record, but Paladin, as far as I know, is possibly one of the most unchanged jobs from back in the day. They have most of the toolkit intact. For example, I'm assuming that the reason why Paladin does not really get any spells or anything making it a Paladin until like level 58 is because, you know, back in A Realm Reborn, Paladin could just use Cure. They had access to the Conjurer's Cure, I believe. So they technically had access to a whole list of white magic spells like a Paladin would. Then they removed the cross-class system, like as a whole, and now you can't. Like now suddenly, Paladin doesn't really have any of these things anymore. So you don't really get anything until level 58.
I won't go down so easy.
So that like it feels so much like it is it's a need of some adjusting. Unfortunately, the timing of that adjustment makes a lot of people a little queasy because right now we're in some sort of a simplification mode expansion where a lot of jobs feel like they have been simplified a little too much, according to some players.
Fighting all 8 of you is just too much for me.
And also it says I'm waiting for Yoshi P to come out with, oh yeah, so we're buffing Gunbreaker again. I'll also say in the defense of said buffing that if I remember correctly, the most recent buff that Gunbreaker received was Bloodfest's cooldown getting increased from 90 seconds to 120, which somehow turned out to be good.
I must say,
Like somehow it was a gain.
I feel we've gained an understanding. I will pound you, silly! Aha! I won't go down so.
And if anyone that doesn't play Gunbreaker is confused by that, basically, before, it was a genuine question whether you should use Bloodfest, which gave you a full resource bar, like Gunbreaker has the powder gauge, on cooldown, which meant that you would often use Bloodfest outside of raid cooldowns because it had a slightly shorter cooldown. You would rarely use it during No Mercy, which is your burst cooldown, only every third time or so, or every second Bloodfest, but every third No Mercy. And by extension of that, you would only have Bloodfest line up with raid cooldowns on the 4th Bloodfest, 6 minutes into the fight, assuming nothing else happened. So the alternative was just delay Bloodfest until the 2-minute cooldowns and stuff. That was an option. What's best could depend on the individual encounter. But then they just increased the cooldown on Bloodfest to 2 minutes. Now it was no longer a question, it was just the only way to do it. And it turned out that that the difference between doing like on cooldown or using it with raid buffs was so small that I think it was almost a buff to Gunbreaker to no longer offer the choice to the player.
I will pound you silly!
The sad part about that, though, is that as someone that makes guides for jobs, is that back in Shadowbringers, and even early on in Endwalker, the way that I taught jobs is that you might have to plan around raid cooldowns if other players are doing it. And that there are multiple choices to make, like you had to learn what was best when. These days, because of all this simplification, there's sort of a correct answer. Just the one.
I admit it. Fighting all 8 of you is just too much for me.
Which is not as interesting, perhaps.
Not I lied. Empathy. Why, I've been hurt. This is far from the strongest of spears. I feel so betrayed. Goodness gracious. I just remembered something.
See. You know, it's much more consistent when it feels like there's a bunch of people doing both Ram's voice and Ultra Vibration. Makes it easier. Oh, it's a little bit of a lag spike. Sorry about that.
I won't go down so easily.
And if anyone is wondering why I'm repeatedly opening the party frames when, like, after each run, this is because the party frames tend to update faster, much faster if they even do it. If you don't, if when you refresh the party list, like you open it again, then it'll update if people have moved somewhere, and you can't queue again for new content unless everyone has left the content they're in. So I'm just doing this to see that everyone has left the dungeon, and then we just queue in again.
Not. Ha! I lied. Empathy.
It minimizes the potential downtime.
Why, I've been hurt.
And when you have content that can be beaten in like 70 seconds, minimizing the downtime in between runs suddenly become extremely important. That was a little strange. Didn't we have multiple people doing the Ultra Vibration on that pack previously?
I must say, I quite enjoy this tussle. I feel we've gained an understanding. An understanding that I will pound you silly! Aha! I won't go down so easily.
I'm 51 tomestones away from my target. So that should be possible in this stream with this pace.
Go on, Enkidu. It's true. Your favorite. I admit it. Fighting all 8 of you is just too much for me. Not. Ha! I lied. Empathy. been had. This is far from the strongest of spears. I feel so betrayed. Goodness gracious. I just remembered something.
Okay. It's still a little bit of hiccups with people figuring out what other people are doing, because suddenly when some people are adapting to what's being done, it also affects what needs to be done.
I won't go down so easily.
Oh. Better than Oran Vale, I guess. Yeah. I didn't really like doing hello, Woolly Ram. How are you doing? But I didn't. I don't like super enjoy the Oran Vale farm. That is usually like the traditional strategy, mainly because the being able to keep up the pace that people want to see requires a lot of skill with Blue Mage. And the interesting thing about that is that, to me, and I used to play World of Warcraft years ago. I played from vanilla World of Warcraft up to and including Legion. I also even played some of Battle for Azeroth. And the thing is that what these power grinding Moogle Tombstone strategies remind me of in World of Warcraft is doing Mythic Plus, which is long and the short of it is speed running harder versions of dungeons. And people will be doing these as if they are, skilled enough and geared enough to run it the fastest way possible. Which often causes problems, because these fast strategies only work if you are that geared, if you are that skilled. And Blue Mage runs in Oran Vale is sort of similar. You can kill do the entire first pull in the dungeon into the boss room, no problem. But if you make a single mistake, the tank dies. But if you get it right, you can get it in record time. You can instantly kill the first boss, you can instantly kill the second boss. The final boss can actually be killed in extremely short order as well, if you know how to do the burst rotation properly. But all of these things imply if you know how. That's also why Battle on the Big Bridge turned out to be more popular than Bravelock's Longstop. Because Battle on the Big Bridge requires relatively low skill to do, while Bravelock's Longstop requires a lot of teamwork. Woolly Ram says, at work, night shift. Oh, rough. I hope you're having a good time at least. It's going really well. I'm just doing a bunch of Moogle Tombstone farming while dealing with a sore throat. So I'm on lots of pain suppression to deal with that.
It's just too much for me.
But that's okay.
Not. Ha! I love everything.
But yeah, that's why I prefer these like shorter strategies that don't require too much practice and mastery to get right. Simply because you are almost bound to have players that will do some strategy, like the Aurum Vale grinding strategy, that aren't doing it properly, and either you do it safely or you do it quickly, and you can't really have it both ways every time, I think. It's of course a little bit exaggerated the way I say it, but the idea is that you need to do things a lot more, you need to be a lot more precise than Battle on the Big Bridge. So the reason why this becomes a problem is because if you've seen these like count-ups of how many tomestones each piece of content gives, the way that you have to look at it when farming like quickly is that you want to know how many you can get per minute. Aurum Vale, I believe, typically gave 4 per clear. So if you could do it in 4 minutes, most people could not, and not even close. Then, like if you could do that, you would get 1 tomestone per minute per run. And if you can do it in, like, if you could do it in 6 or 7 minutes, in most seasons where Aurum Vale was best, it was still almost the best, or reliably one of the better options, even if it took you twice the time. Like, getting half a tomestone per minute was still pretty good. So there was nothing to worry about. You would learn to get faster and faster if you really cared. Exactly as Wooly Ram says, gotta admit to yourself that your skills at a game are not always as high as you would like it to be. The particular situation where I'm giving as an example with World of Warcraft is that in World of Warcraft there is this thing called the MDI, the Mythic Dungeon Invitational, I believe it is called, which is, imagine, you know how there is the world first race when there is a new savage tier. The MDI is basically like a race, a contest of the best players in the game, like at dungeons in World of Warcraft, to see who can do it the fastest. And the thing is that a lot of players get their inspiration for how to most efficiently clear dungeons in World of Warcraft from these invitationals, these MDI contests. The reason why that is a problem is because it is equivalent to watching the best professional teams at a sport that you like, and watching their strategies and trying to employ them wholesale as is without considering anything going behind it. You're not as fit as those professionals. You are simply not as good at the game as them. So on and so forth. It's not going to work as well because these strategies that they might be employing in their sport might be related to how their opponents are playing. Who knows? So it's like,
Remembered something.
granted, it's far simpler when we're just doing Aurum Vale really quickly, but the concepts are similar in that you're trying to apply a very, very efficient strategy
I must say,
where it's you and 3 strangers potentially.
gained an understanding.
Just to take a specific example, the Bravelock's Longstop Hard speedrunning strategy, the one that is competing with this strategy that we're employing here, it requires, for the first boss, you can simply use the missile, I believe. The classic double missile to kill the boss outright. The second boss, you need to do the Moon Flute open up perfectly, and now you have to remember that Blue Mage has an optimal opener that involves Moon Flute. Moon Flute gives you 15 seconds to perform said opener, and then you can do nothing for 15 seconds. So if a speedrun of a boss requires that you do the Moon Flute opener perfectly, and it means that you need to have the correct gear, and you need to perform the rotation or the opener perfectly. And everyone in your party has to do that to get the boss dead before you're all stuck doing nothing for 15 seconds. And if you all used Moon Flute, then none of you can cast heals, so you're all dead, potentially. And the third boss requires a pull timer, so that you can time your final stings so they all land at the same time. If you mess that up, like one final sting is like 1 or 2 seconds off maybe, then the boss will go into an intermission, which takes around a minute. And the margin, like the time margin between using this strategy versus doing Bravelock's Longstop is so tight that if you add a minute to the Bravelock's Longstop strategy, then it's slower than the Battle on the Big Bridge by too much to be even competitive, as far as I understand. As in, Battle on the Big Bridge gives you 2 tomestones every 90 seconds in a bad run. Like in a bad group, it can give you every 90 seconds. In a good one, you can get them in 70 seconds or so. So Bravelock's Longstop, I think it gives, is it 3 or 4? I think it's 4. To compete with this, you would be able to need to be able to beat Bravelock's Longstop in less than 4 minutes. So if it's about 4 minutes normally, and if you mess it up, it's 5 minutes, then it's not competitive with the alternative. And now you also remember that there was a whole bunch of things you had to do perfectly additionally for this to work.
I must say, I quite enjoy these tussles. I feel we've gained an understanding. I will pound you, silly! Ha-ha! I won't go down so easily.
Let's see. I still need 39 more tomes. So, less than 20 runs. Ocelot says, trying to get this static to respond to me for Omega. Oh, you're trying to find a static for the upcoming ultimate, I take it? I hope you get it. Nope. And Wooly Ram says, I think it was Sid Meier that said, given the opportunity, gamers will optimize the fun out of a game. Yeah, I think that might be right. I can't remember who the quote it goes to, but it is absolutely true. I think one of the best, a really good way to just interpret that is if you look at some of the weirdest, jankiest openers in Final Fantasy XIV. You will probably be able to relatively easily convince yourself that the devs can't possibly have created that job rotation with that opener in mind. Like an excellent case of that is the 18-second Paladin opener. That can't be intentional. Uh-oh. Oh, that was a little close. But Ethanar was smart, just abusing the teleport invuln to just cast Final Sting. They had it under control. That was really good recovery. And that is exactly the reason why you have a tank in these groups. When something goes wrong, you can much more easily recover it if you have a tank. Then you just hold Gilgamesh for a second. Yeah, exactly. Wally Ram says, nowadays you can find optimizations for any game on YouTube within seconds, often before a game is even released, because the creators that are most interested in a particular game will often be given like early access to the game in some capacity, so they're already making the perfectly optimized guides before the game comes out. I believe it was in New World, where before like casual players even set foot in the game, they were already, every single material in the game that you could find had already been mapped out, where it is and what the best farming route was. Where the whole point was that it was supposed to be interesting to explore and find, but if the guide is there, then why figure it out on your own, right? And also it says they're offering 15 hours per day for 2 weeks. Oh boy. Make sure, like, if you're joining them, make sure to do all of your shopping beforehand. Make sure that you don't have to go to work. And bring coffee. Because you're going to be sleeping most of the hours that are not raiding, or you're going to not sleep very much. But that is what it takes if you want to be among the first ones to get it cleared.
Go on, Enkidu. It's Toad, your favorite. I admit it.
And Will Ram says, gacha games, Persona. What is it SMT stands for again? I feel like I've heard it so many times, but I always forget what the acronym is for. World of Warcraft, you can get a full checklist day by day of what and how much to farm. Yeah, exactly. This is something where one thing that I think is interesting to look at in Final Fantasy XIV is intuitive rotations. If you've seen, I have a guide on simple jobs to play, which happens to feature my bias for Sage, because I believe Sage is easy to play. But one thing that I try to prominently display in that guide is that it... Uh-oh, it reset. But yeah, a job having a intuitive rotation, as in, it's sort of clear how the rotation is performed without needing to consult a super complex guide. Makes a job, for some players, probably a lot more enjoyable, but also a lot easier. And what I mean by that is, of course, as Wally Ram says, you can get all the guides, you can get all the checklists of what you should do to maximize. But sometimes it is easy enough that you can do it like 95% correct number pulled out of thin air, but you know, mostly correct without having to consult a second opinion, because the job is made intuitively. The way you're supposed to play the job is the obvious answer to what most players would do. That might be a good thing for some players, it might be a bad thing for others. And Sydney says it's Shin Megami Tensei. Thank you. I keep forgetting, and I know that I should know it because I know Skullwolf uses that that acronym on the regular, and I just keep forgetting it.
I won't go down so easily.
And Wally Ram says, I would guess that most jobs will do fine if you put all your OGCDs and as many GCDs within your damage cooldown. Yes, that is true. I think a good example, like some of the jobs that are less intuitive tends to be jobs that don't really have a damage cooldown. Or it plays a part in your rotation that causes it to be complicated. I believe Ninja, if you just take everything and try and put it in both your trick attack and your Mog buffs, you will find that you have to choose some things that fall out of your raid bar, like of your damage buffs, because you have so many things you can use. And that somehow makes the job a little less intuitive. But the idea is there, like the groundwork is there, it's obvious what you're supposed to be doing, I imagine. But yeah, exactly, that general idea of just putting all your damage in the damage boosting cooldown is usually fine.
I quite enjoy this tussle. I feel we've gained an understanding. I will pound you, silly! Aha! I won't go down so easily.
But I think it's a good thing that you can do it mostly correctly by just doing that, Woolly Ram. I think that's a good thing. The problem that is sort of coming about is that people are becoming unsatisfied with mostly correct, I think. If that makes sense. Some players would rather know what 100% correct is immediately than try to guess what 90% correct is. So they will look up the guide anyway. There's this video making the rounds on YouTube on instrumental gameplay, I believe it's called. The subject is that it is rude to be bad at World of Warcraft. supposedly. The reasoning is that because all of the resources are there, it is almost like you couldn't be bothered to do the homework. And so the other players have to work extra because of your laziness. That is how it is effectively getting framed. You might think that's absurd. But if you've ever joined a Savage raid blind without the Savage raid intending to be blind, so you have 7 other players that aren't blind, they're expecting that everyone sort of has an idea what to do, but you're blind. That is essentially I think the easiest way to picture it. Everyone else did the homework, you didn't, and that's sort of rude. Now, I think that most players can agree that it's at least good manners to at least let your party know that you're blind, so that they can choose whether they will put up with that before starting. Or better yet, you join a party of blind, like first timers, that all are in the same boat. That is the easiest solution to that problem. But when that extends to something as basic as your rotation, how your job works, that certainly means that some players might feel inclined to say that you aren't like that you're ruining other players' experience because you didn't look up a guide, you didn't want to spoil yourself on how to play the job, you wanted to figure it out yourself. And that's where it starts to become a problem. As Wally Ram says, I don't think you need a perfect rotation to do normal raids, alliance, daily dungeons. Exactly. You don't even need the perfect rotations to extremes and savage. You need to have it mostly right, but I'm pretty sure you can do enough damage eventually with some extra gear. You know, what the average player will be doing usually is gradually progress through the savage raid tier. And as they go, they will get more gear, which will compensate for lack of mastery of the game. You don't have to be perfect, not even in Savage. But because of this instrumental play idea, some players, and I say some, will feel like, yeah, exactly that. You are being rude for not being prepared. If you've ever been in a daily dungeon and you're a tank, for example, and you feel a little bit annoyed that the healer is just spamming cure, even when you have full health, that is like a milder form of this problem. This player, this healer in your party, couldn't be bothered. Oh. Couldn't be bothered to learn the basics of healing, for example. To the degree that they're not even bothering to cast their attacks. You might feel a little bit annoyed by that, because by the time that they're doing, you know, a level 90 expert roulette or something, surely the person has to have figured out they don't have to do that. Surely they don't have to spam cure for things to be alright. In fact, surely they have healed enough tanks that they can see, well, the warrior is full health. It's probably going to be fine. And Ocelot says, I think it's very subjective depending on the player. If you tell me you're blind and don't understand something, then that's fine. But if you're a healer casting Physic at level 90 and only spamming that, then that shows me you've not learned anything. And I will ask you to do damage, but if you still cast Physic, then it's just a lost cause to me. Yeah, exactly. Sometimes, if a healer is just spamming heals, I will offer them the opportunity to attack and remind them that tanks also have heals. The simple fact that the healers constantly spamming heals to keep you fully topped actually prevents the tank from benefiting from their heals, right? So you could say that not only is the healer just spamming Physic, making the run slower than it needs to be, but they are simultaneously robbing the tank of some of the enjoyment of dealing with minimizing damage taken and stuff like that. Like, it's complicated. But yeah, also, whether someone is going in blind. If you're going into a Savage Raid for the first time, well, if you're going into a Savage fight and you're still in the practicing phase, right? Then, then there isn't a huge issue in you being blind. How can I say it? If you're joining a party that is like we're at Enrage or something like that, then I could imagine that most players would be pretty annoyed if you went in blind, right? But if you're joining a party that is, you know, starting from the beginning, then it's typically not an issue. Maybe if they ask you to watch the guide, then it automatically becomes an issue. But as Ocelot says, it's subjective. If I had gone into a Savage fight and someone turned out to be blind, but they had said so up front, and we're in like a learning party, I might not be that annoyed by it. But if we're in a clear party of any capacity, there's a much bigger chance that someone would be very angry very quickly.
I admit it. Fighting all 8 of you is just too much for me. Not half my line. Everything. I've been had. It's far from the strongest of spears. I feel so betrayed. Goodness gracious. I just remembered something.
And Woolly Ram says, all this could be solved by gamers talking and not expecting strangers to be psychic. That, and a lot of the issues can also be resolved by people remembering that we're here to have fun, I feel. And yeah, I'm not saying that you can resolve everything by just remembering that you have to have fun. But sometimes people can get so caught up in this instrumental play stuff, as it is, that you forget that you're here to have fun. And World Ram says, MMOs are a bit like team sports, play by the rules of the game or the club. Exactly. The reason why it can cause some problems is also because if you could join a sports team instantaneously from the comfort of your own home, which is what Party Finder is, then it can be tiring to deal with all of the learning to know people and stuff. And also we know that gamers tend to be a little bit more introverted. So there's a lot that plays in there as well. But exactly, talking and just agreeing on what you want to do or don't want to do from the get-go can resolve a lot of issues. And Ocelot says, at the end of the day, a lot of the free Final Fantasy community just want to help one another, but a lot of players thinks it's a personal attack when you can have the best intentions. Yeah, you suggest that they use an attack instead of just spamming heals, and you know that it's going to be a great dungeon when their response is, you don't pay my sub. That is, of course, the ultimate problem player when they say that.
I lied. I've been had. This is far from the strongest of spears. I feel so betrayed. Goodness gracious. I just remembered something. I must say, I quite enjoy these tussles. I feel we've gained an understanding. An understanding that I will pound you silly! Aha! I will rocket punch!
Uh-oh. We managed it. Sydney says, I logged off work early and been leveling my white mage the past hour. Nice. Have you gotten far with white mage? And more importantly, are you having fun with it?
Go on, Enkidu. It's cool. Your favorite. Fine. I admit it.
And Sydney says, I think it is easy to forget people don't have the same context. It's the same with programming. Everyone thinks their hard-earned knowledge is common sense.
Not.
Oh yeah, that's true. That is absolutely true. That it's very easy to forget that that your experience might differ from other players. This is something that I think is very important to think about when you accomplish something in the game. Like I have friends that will say outright that they feel that say Savage P5S, for example, is easy or trivial, so it should be easy to beat for anyone. But the thing is that if you say that the thing that you fought hard to master, to learn, to be able to defeat is trivial, what you're doing is taking your accomplishment, the thing that you are good at doing, and turning that into a downfall of everyone else. Instead of being able to pride yourself on something you can do, that you are so awesome that you can do, you are choosing to wield it as a weapon to tell everyone else that they're bad. It's better to focus on your achievements, or to view it as an achievement for yourself, rather than flipping it on its head like that. And Wooly Ram says, I placed the healer problem at the feet of Square. They don't give healers any of their OGC tools before level 60. That's true. However, if you do the the healer starting guide at level 15, you know, with the smith, they will actually tell you that if no one needs healing, you should be attacking, and they will teach you that as one of the first things. So a healer that claims that they don't need to attack because they're a healer has not performed Final Fantasy XIV's healer introduction guide, the one made by the developers themselves. So you could say that even at the very base level of the game, you should know this. Which is also why it's a great example of players not really having learned anything if they don't do that. Everyone learns at different paces, so some people take longer, but the moment you have someone that you suggest they attack a bit and they say they don't have to because they're a healer, they haven't even, you know, read the play guide. They haven't even done the absolute minimum of research, and that's where it starts to fall apart. But it's totally true that it's a little difficult to sell healers on the whole attack at all times when all of your backup tools for when things don't work out well are given after level 50.
Just remembered something.
Nuzlot says, I only started the game in 5.2, but I've seen loads of people come and go. From casual content all the way to ultimate. And all skill tiers are guilty of it. Yeah.
I must say, I quite enjoy these tussles. I feel we've gained an understanding.
Hey Vento, I hope you're doing well.
I will pound you, silly!
Said, I feel like around level 70, expecting my teammates to know how to play their jobs is reasonable. Most jobs in this game aren't that complex. I think when I zone into content past level 70, I'd expect players to at least know like the basics of their role. Like for instance, I would expect a tank to have like at least the basic idea of how cooldown cycling works, like defensive cooldown cycling. I would expect a healer to know when they need to cast heals and when they don't, so that they don't, you know, waste all of their time casting heals. And I would expect a DPS to at least know to use their cooldowns sometimes, right, for damage. But I don't expect perfection. If I wanted perfection, then I would need to be in a savage raid. And as was it Woolly Ram that said it earlier, that exactly, you don't need a perfect rotation to normal raids, alliance, or daily dungeons. So as long as you're not, you know, playing terribly, then I don't care. Then I don't mind. If you're trying, then that's okay. And World Ram says lessons need reinforcement through gameplay. One line of text is sorely lacking. Actually, how would you force a healer to learn that they have to attack in a party? We know that a healer, like a player that heals, surely they have done main quest stuff or job quest stuff where they had to attack. Surely they have had to know that sometimes you need to attack. But when you introduce a party, suddenly you can say, well, how, like, exactly is that try to teach them through the job quests, because in the job quests the healer has to attack sometimes. This is true, but in a party with other players, that healer can somehow, and I'm saying somehow, can reason that there are other players that can attack, so I don't have to anymore. So that means that the only way to force a healer to learn that they have to attack is to somehow make it mandatory. You would need to have dungeon bosses. You'd have to make dungeon bosses that need a certain amount of damage done by the healer to actually die, so that the healer knows that they have to attack. But this would be really weird. I have met DPS players that have reached max level without ever understanding that there is a difference between weapon skills and abilities. How did that happen? You join a group with other players, the boss will die eventually, whether you play optimally or not. So if you just get paired with relatively decent players consistently, you will never need to master anything. Of course, you, like, there's space for very casual players as well. That's how they can manage to get through this. But the fact that you can get this far with a DPS job means that the problem isn't exclusive to healers. It is also a problem for any job. You don't have to be particularly great at the game to reach the max level. We can't Ram's voice when the first people on the road ran past them. Oh dear.
I must say, I quite enjoy this puzzle. I feel we've gained an understanding. I will help.
Let's see. And Ocelot says that there is that white mage quest where that NPC where she says, I don't want to do more, you can't make me, I'm good at healing. Is there an NPC that says that? Wow. And that encapsulates every Sprout healer that refuses to do damage. Yeah. But yeah, it is difficult. It is difficult to figure out how to teach players as they level how the game is played, because the simple fact that you're paired with other players mean that there's always the opportunity that you just get randomly paired with really good players. And the fact that very bad players can get this far in the story is more like a pride thing for the community rather than a problem, because the reason why players can get this far without really knowing how to play the game very much is because the community is very friendly and helps each other. If we didn't, then this would automatically become a significantly bigger issue, right? If you would get kicked from a group for not doing enough DPS or something, then a healer or a DPS would automatically feel way more inclined to learn how to DPS properly, right? But that doesn't happen.
I must say, I quite enjoy this tussle. I feel we've gained an understanding.
And Vento says, honestly, I've always wanted a healer who has to deal damage to heal effectively, although it's probably never going to happen. I think the day that Sage was put in the game, we got the closest thing we can get to that. Because anything that healed that heals strictly through attacking would feel too similar to Sage in some respects, I think. But if they added something like that, it would be the ultimate example of how, well, healers also have to attack. But I thought, honestly, that this simply, like, the mere existence of the Sage should have been enough of a hint of this. But I might be wrong. Also, it says, I always tell them, the healers that will not attack, your job isn't to keep me as close to 100% HP as possible, it's to try your best to keep me away from 0%. And usually that gets through to them. That is a good tip. I usually focus on the fact that I can heal myself too. But that, I suppose, sounds more like me offering to help them heal rather than suggesting that they're healing a bit too much. So that is a good tip. Maybe I should try that next time. In most cases, for me personally, I just let the healers that don't attack, mostly I just let them do it because I don't want to argue with them. Sometimes they're friendly, sometimes they're not.
I won't cook out so easily.
And Will Ram says, oh yeah, that was a relation to making content where you can't not damage. He said, if they fail, put a massive message on the screen saying do more damage. Only slightly, seriously. I think it would be good if we could find a way to teach players whether they're doing well or poorly in a group without introducing a DPS meter. But the thing is that I think whether your damage is good or bad requires more knowledge than something that an automatic system put in by the dev team could give, right? And what I mean by that is that your like how much damage you did, whether that is good or bad, is related to how the dungeon is structured, if it is a dungeon. Some jobs just have better AoE damage for certain portions of a dungeon, and so on and so forth. So it might be difficult for some, system in the game to explain to you whether your damage is good or bad. But certainly doing something to tell players would be nice. The thing is that we sort of need it to be private information, because if everyone can see it, then the concern is that it leads to toxic behavior. The whole reason why DPS meters aren't really, officially allowed and things like that is exactly because of that. As far as I know. Oh. Is anyone leaving? But I think it would be a good idea. I think duty support, as it is actually a pretty good way for players to realize their own personal performance in relation to a party. As in, the players that I have spoken with that I know are not very good, like their damage is not great, and they tend to depend on other players to perform when they're doing content for the first time. They tend to have a lot of trouble doing content in duty support, because in duty support you are expected to do the majority of the heavy lifting at the end of the day. The NPCs can do the mechanics somewhat accurately, getting flashbacks to Urianger taking a little stroll across a circle AoE and promptly dying for no particular reason. But if your damage is really low, then you will notice that there are more mechanics, and because in duty support, if you die, I believe the encounters immediately reset. You have to nail it. You sort of have to nail it, and some players just can't do that. And the best way to learn is for the game to ask more of you. The way I've explained it at one point is, imagine if you played Dark Souls 3 or something, Elden Ring, some really hard game, and the game would always give you overpowered NPCs to carry you, like to just carry you through it. All you had to do was survive. I could imagine that a large amount of players would learn to play the game simply by surviving rather than fighting. Doing a dungeon for the first time with strangers that happen to be significantly more skilled or geared than you is like that, I'd say. It's like that. The Ocelot says you could always do something with the commendation system at the end of each fight, such as Kaitsu contributes to X% of the damage, and it might give players more of an incentive. It's a good idea. The problem is with having any public knowledge is that if everyone knows that Kaitsu, who happens to be one of the DPS, is contributing 60% of the damage, or something insane like that, then surely someone in the party is not performing. And I know this starts to sound extremely cynical, but this is like the level of any information can turn into toxicity that we have to deal with. I think it's a good idea to celebrate the players that are doing well, to give players the incentive to try and perform. I think that is a good idea. It's just how is the best way to do it that causes it to become problematic immediately. And Ocelot also says Leonis mitigated X amount of damage. It could be that it's a bit, it might be problematic, like how Monster Hunter does it, or like Overwatch 1's end screen. Oh yeah. Inventor says, with duty support, I can never tell if I'm supposed to AoE trash packs or single target them with the NPCs. The fastest way to do duty support is to AoE. Because the NPCs will not. So the best you can do is AoE as hard as you can. If you're not the tank, then keep in mind that the tank duty support character automatically just emits infinite enmity as soon as it is in range of the enemies. So you don't have to worry about aggro. If you are the tank, then I would also say you should still just AoE, because you will do the most damage simply by virtue of you AoEing. But I feel like, so in my experience, your duty, like your queue in the duty finder, has to be astronomically long for it to be worth it. In for it to be worth it to use duty support over simply queuing with players. So I think the like the biggest incentive you should have to doing duty support should be lore reasons or practice. It shouldn't be speed running.
Fighting all eight of
Also, it says, I'll never forget Urianger casting Death of the Seventh Dawn on a simple frog in Dawn Make. That sounds aggressive. Have you seen that that duty support NPCs, if they cast a spell that is normally AoE in nature, it will still be single target when they cast it? It's pretty funny. Uh-oh, I got interrupted. Okay, we got it.
I must say, I quite enjoy these tussles. I feel we've gained an understanding. And I will pound you.
This is the last run I'll be doing, and then I will be back very shortly after, and then we'll be rounding off the stream. Yeah, I have pretty much acquired all of the tomestones that I need. Yeah. So for everyone on the stream, I will be finishing this particular clear. And then I will be right back, and then we will round up the stream. I think it's an interesting conversation to talk about these things, with what it takes to get a not well performing player to be inspired to do better. And I do think things like play of the game from other games, or other ways to like celebrate the good players, is an excellent way to give motivation. Make the new player say, I want to be the guy that it says did the most damage. I think it's a good idea. The problem is how to implement it without it getting toxic. And the reason why I'm worried that it'll get toxic is because it doesn't... going from being able to discuss DPS to people to people being mean to players that do worse, the distance is very short. So that's why I say that they need to be super careful with implementing a system like this. Alright, I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back. Let's see. Let's spend the tomestones that we have been collecting. And aside from that, this is the time of the stream where we normally round up everything, meaning that if you have something you would like to talk about in particular a little bit, then this is a great time to bring it up. I have a little bit of time where we're not repeatedly fighting Gilgamesh, giving you a chance to talk about anything you would like. Invento says, is it just me, or are the tombstone rewards kinda not great this time around? I don't know. I don't know. I think they were fine. I wonder what has been on previous ones to make it feel like this one is particularly bad. I'm guessing it's because there's no particularly fancy mounts. Maybe because you've farmed out most of the mounts already. That might do it. Sorry. A sneeze snuck up on me. I hope I didn't blow your ears out. But yeah, if you already had most of the things on the list, then this would feel very, very slim. I feel like there being a mount from the firmament is not like something that is there every time. And I believe the albino caracal is that. Not going into Eureka funny mode is nice. It's hard to say. I feel like if there's nothing that specifically stands out to you, like, oh, I need this, then the Moogle Treasure Trove is going to feel meh. And I think personally the fanciest item on the list this season is the Falcon Ignition Key. And I think a lot of players already have this. Either you have it from a login reward, you have bought it on a previous season, or you don't have it. That's the options. And if you care about this mount, then this is huge. If you don't, then this treasure trove doesn't have much. There was just a handful of things that I didn't have, so I decided to farm it out. Sydney says, I'm still new and working towards endgame, but whether I'm in a raid leader friends free company or I leave and try a new one, they are always pretty inactive. Should I just wait for the next X-Pack to raid? As far as I know, no, I haven't done like an extreme amount of Savage raidings. I haven't been in a lot of teams. But as far as I'm aware, Savage raid teams are typically done through link shells. So joining a free company to raid is a way to go about it, but it's more a way to find people that want to raid and then try to join, either get them to join your raid team that you're making or join their already existing raid team. Yeah, there are a lot of ways to go about finding a raid team. Apparently, I believe there are um, both Discord servers for each data center. There are subreddits for looking for raid teams. Exactly, Ocelot has some suggestions. Sydney says, what is a link shell? A link shell is an alternative communication system. You can have 8 link shells and 8 cross-world link shells. I imagine the most likely scenario is that you will be using a cross-world link shell for a raid team. The reason is that you will probably have players from different servers in your raid team, and the way that a link shell works is that a normal link shell, you can only add people from your server or your world to it, and it basically functions as a chat room. A cross-world link shell simply adds the detail that you can also have cross-world players on it, and then it's a little simpler on what you can do. Let me see here. If you see this icon that looks like the pearl, there's a link shell distributor. They will teach you the basics. They'll let you make link shells. I believe you can make cross-world link shells from anywhere. But it's basically free companies. As I see it, a free company is where you hang out, like that's your family in the game, your friend group. Link shells are for specific things, dedicated things. You can have a link shell for hunting, like hunt targets. You can have a link shell for nearly anything. For instance, a raid team. So I would imagine that that would be what you would use it for. And Ocelot says, there's also the Final Fantasy XIV recruitment subreddit. And you remember you once got invited to a link shell called The Orphanage, which was apparently a link shell for free agent type endgame raiders that you could rely on to sub in. That is pretty funny, yeah. A homeless raider. I hope that makes sense, Sydney. But that would be my my suggestion would be that you should look for a link shell, and that may require that you use alternative tools to find a raid team than joining a free company in game. However, you joining a free company and finding it very inactive is like sort of a problem on its own. And there's Poe. And Ocelot says plenty of places to look, even if you don't want to advertise. You can always check the posts. Never doubt yourself from getting into endgame. Everybody starts somewhere. And Wooly Ram says the best raiders can be found in Limsa's Ether Plaza. Just look for potatoes with neon weapons. Yeah. I will say there's one thing that Sydney has the right of it in terms of joining a raid team. Right now, we are exactly at the tail end of the first half of this raid tier. That sounds really weirdly specific. But all of the raid teams that are already existing and doing raiding probably have, like, they have their teams in order, and they might be, doing re-clears every week. The teams that haven't been established yet might very well choose to start with a major patch drop, which means 10th of January, both because people come back for major patches, meaning more players, and because the major patch in the middle of a raid tier, which is the one coming out on the 10th, gives you a lot of opportunities to gear more easily, meaning that you can have a raid team that gets a much smoother, much softer start, which can be good for new starting raid teams to not burn out. You can have a higher item level starting up. So I could imagine that right now, this exact very moment might be the worst time to look for a raid team, while next week might be a great time. Maybe even the week after that. But if you want to raid in a raid tier, it might be easier to join a raid team like a little bit before the raid tier starts, so that you already have the foot in, like have a foot in the door of a raid team before they start raiding, so they have a chance to get to know you and stuff like that. But it's difficult. I do believe so. I have a guide on everything to do to prepare yourself for raiding, for savage raiding, like a preparation guide. And part of that preparation is finding a raid team. And in that guide, I say something to the effect of finding a raid team might be harder than a savage boss in the first place. And I do stand by that. Finding a raid team is difficult. One that you can join, namely. Finding a raid team that you like mesh well with, that you can be friends with, that you can play with a lot and stay with, is really hard. And Ocelot says, I'll have you know I'm a big cat with neon weapons. Stereotyping. I mean, I don't know what you would like. Typically, the best way to find savage raiders is to inspect them, check their gear, and see if they have a 630 or 635 weapon right now. But I know that it's mostly a joke. Nozelot says, raid teams can be terrifying. Whenever you look back on your achievements of endgame content, you remember the people you did it with. Exactly. I used to raid heroic and later mythic raids in World of Warcraft. Years ago. But typically what inspired me to do that was that I have a really good friend that loves to raid, and I like to play with him. So whenever he would be playing, he would get me into a raiding guild. So if he wasn't playing, I was typically not raiding. Couples in raid teams can be problematic, yeah. Generally, if you have a raid team where there is a significant amount of players that know each other particularly well, compared to the rest of it, that can be a problem. Because then if someone says the wrong thing to someone else, then suddenly you have 4 people that might be leaving just because of that. My suggestion, Sydney, is that you take the concern of joining a raid team when you reach max level. Like when you're starting to reach the point where you're like, I think I'm going to be doing, like, I'm starting to think I'm ready to do some Savage content. Then that's when you start to look for a raid team. And don't worry too much about it right now. I think if you're in a dead free company or an inactive free company, it would still be a good idea to see if you can find a free company that isn't dead or inactive. That makes the game more enjoyable when you have people to play with. And then I would say just don't worry about the Savage stuff for now. Ocelot also says, one time one of our tanks and his girlfriend were late because she made him throw all of his yellow shirts out because she just hated that specific color. And he had to throw out all his yellow shirts at that very moment. Community Finder is great for free companies. That could be. Personally, I'm not very good at... I'm guessing you mean the Fellowship Finder, maybe? Personally, I'm not very good at suggesting where to look to get a free company, because the very first free company I joined was a free company where the leader asked me how I was doing before they just tossed an invite in my face, asked if I was actually interested in joining one, and things like that. And that one eventually died, and the free company I joined instead was one that I had a friend in, like they were already there, so I joined them. And when that free company eventually exploded because of drama, I followed a friend from that free company that had made their own free company over to a different one. And when that caused a lot of drama, I took a few friends of my own and made my own free company, which is kind of inactive. But that's okay, because that's how we work. But the point is that I wouldn't be able to tell you where to start to find a free company, because I have been lucky with what I've done. Or unlucky, was really to say. Now, before I forget, I would like to mention that this YouTube channel has a Discord community server, which is very helpful if either you would like to talk with the people that you have seen in the streams outside of a stream, or if you would like easier access to schedules and stuff. There's a dedicated channel where I put the weekly schedule up, so you always know when I'm streaming. It also includes, you know, when new videos are coming. There's a separate channel where I post whenever, like, post a link whenever whenever new video or a new stream is coming out. So if you want to follow the channel a little bit closer and you don't want to depend on YouTube's algorithm choosing when is the right time for you to receive a video or whatever, then the Discord channel is a great place to be. It is not extremely talkative necessarily. There's talk sometimes, other times there's just a little bit of quiet for a few days. Depends if there's something to talk about. Yeah, I just wanted to mention it. The link to the Discord community server is the pinned comment in the live chat for anyone interested. And Wooly Ram says, I play on off time due to working night shifts. On the plus side, no free company drama llamas. On the minus side, it's a pug life for me. Yeah, my friend Sip works night shifts as well, so he has a little bit of the same problem, but he hasn't even tried doing savage raiding because he would like to do it with a team, but he can't find one. And Ocelot says the community finder that you can search on the lodestone is great. It allows you to shop around for a free company that aligns with your needs. I'd never join an FC that is quantity over quality. That's true. Oh yeah, that community finder. I feel like I've heard that a bunch of people have recommended it. In particular, very big content creators have recommended it, and when their own free company ultimately died or became inactive and they needed to find a new one, they discovered that that the community finder wasn't the easiest tool to use because a lot of players don't know it exists, and a tool specifically for social activities that people don't know exists can be problematic. For example, World of Warcraft used to have, an LFG tool for making groups, a little bit like the party finder that we have here, but the old version of it wasn't that great. So very quickly people stopped bothering to try to use it, which meant no one used it, which meant that you never find people through it, so there was no point in using it. So it's like an endless cycle there. If a social tool doesn't get people to use it, then there's no people there, so people won't use it. Right. On that note, what else did I have to say? Tomorrow, if you are interested in knowing ways to spend your astronomy tomestones to not waste them, or maybe want some advice on what to do with them leading up to a major patch, I am releasing a video guide on this very subject tomorrow. And on Friday, we are continuing the replay of the main story in MSQ Rewind Replay. And we continue from somewhere in the middle of the Stormblood story. So if you want to watch along for that stream, then that is when that happens. And if I don't see you on either of those, then I hope, well, regardless of whether I see you on either of those, I would like to say, have an excellent time. I hope you had a good year. I hope you have an awesome New Year celebration if you have planned anything, and if you don't, then I hope you have a great day. Anyway, it was very nice. I think we had a lot of good conversations on the stream. Thank you all so much for hanging out. And I think that's all I have now. I don't have a fancy ending of stream page to flip to, so usually I just say good night and then we go. So as I say, good night or good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. And I'll see you guys very soon, hopefully. Good night. And then I will close the stream. See you.